it's funny. I have heard stories of how awesome St. George is, but man, you pack in the house. I'm very impressed. It's so good to see you. I love you. Well, thank you. I hope that, oh, thank you. Okay, perfect. I hope that you kind of look past me as we talk about this today. Just to kind of give you a little insight into why I did this. I retired in December because I was working for a big tech company, and I had spent several years working in DC, which is why I'm such a fan of the Studdards, and I worked under Bush and Obama. I worked for a big tech company in Vegas for about 12 years, and then I grew up so poor. I had to wear hand-me-downs and Deseret Industry clothes. I had a pink coat as a 6-year-old. I got made fun of, and until I got big, and then but I had this life path, and I've had a professional course in what Zion is not. I have done things and made mistakes and been human and realized that there are better ways to do things. And I kind of grew up in this environment professionally, working for presidents, working for billionaires, where I found I was working with amazing people, but oftentimes their hearts would become hard. And I found many times, many of us, including myself, we were chasing the dust of the earth instead of the gold of heaven. And in 2020, right before COVID hit, I had just come back from China. I was in Shenzhen and Shanghai, China, at the invitation of Greenpeace to talk about data centers and renewable energy and fun stuff like that. And I had several dreams, and they kept coming back. And I would wake up as early as like 4:37 in the morning, which is kind of a funny number. And I would have these dreams that Vegas was filled with sirens, and there were ambulances everywhere. And this was all before COVID hit. And I felt this urgency to find as much as I could, to study as much as I could about Zion. I've always been a proponent personally of having a personal relationship with Christ, and how the Holy Ghost introduces us to Christ, and then Christ will introduce us to our parents, our heavenly parents. And my grandfather taught religion at BYU for many years. His name was George Pace, if you know George Pace. And so I've always had this belief that you can gain revelation. Joseph Smith talks about how the least of the saints can understand the mysteries of heaven as quickly as we're willing to bear them or to receive them. And so I believed, hey, if I'm having these dreams, maybe I should do something about it. And so I started studying everything I could about Zion, and I approached it from a very legal, academic, scholastic approach, and started gathering all this data. And I just was like, I feel like I should write a book. And so it became my quarantine quest to put this into a format that could be helpful. Now, my whole goal with all that background is to say, I am a weak and humble conduit, and I hope you just hear Christ's voice in this. I hope it points you to him. I hope it helps you see how you can help other people find him, because we are living in a crazy time. The suicide rate of the youth has jumped exponentially in the last 10 years after going through a decline. And there are natural disasters all over the place. I don't know if you know this, but in Canada, for example, I mean, we all know about COVID. We all know about hurricanes and tornadoes and the earthquakes. We had an earthquake in Vegas. I worked for a company where they said, we don't have earthquakes in Vegas. Okay, my gate still doesn't close properly because of the earthquake in Vegas. And so, all these crazy things have been happening. But in Canada, for example, there was a lightning storm where there were 177,000 lightning strikes in 1 hour. There was so much upheaval, it was easy to just not even know it was happening, right? We became used to the noise. So this effort was an effort to try and point ourselves to Christ. And we're not going to be able to cover everything today. I like to pack way too much in, and I like the sound of my own voice. So if you want to interrupt me, go ahead and interrupt me. I think we're going to say no interruptions. Okay, we're not interrupting. We'll save the questions for the end. Thank you for the head shaking. And I'm happy to stay as long as you want and talk more about this, because I have found whenever I can talk about it and share, it edifies me, and hopefully you feel the Spirit and feel closer to Christ through this process. So I want to hit 3 points. The first point is Zion influences all major religions. It has since the beginning of the earth, since Enoch's first rise into heaven. And it's fascinating, but this idea that heaven is above is something that is not only in all Abrahamic traditions with Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, it's also in Hinduism, it's in Buddhism, it's in Native American religions with the Mayans and the Aztecs, it's in every major religion you can study. No one believes that it's good to go down. Everyone believes it's good to go up. Where did that come from? Well, this idea that all of us should be looking up, that we should be looking skyward, and I'm so sorry you can't see it over there. This idea that we should be, all the religions, even all of our scriptures point to this idea of being lifted up, sealed up, raised up, laid up, hid up, caught up, ascend up, carried up, called up to sit in high places. We even refer to the Lord as the God of the Most High. We refer to the high priesthood. This idea of elevation being associated with illumination and power, and the Lord will take up his righteousness in a cloud at the last day. All of this comes from the original ascent of Zion, the original Zion rising. Now, I think it's important, sorry for my formatting's a little off, I think it's important for us to talk about this for just a second. Joseph Smith, now one of the things that led me to write this book, Joseph Smith taught that the city of Enoch was literally raised into the heavens. Not just symbolically, not just, hey, we're holding hands and kumbaya and we disappear up into a cloud. Literally, by the foundation, the city was raised up. And he also taught that the Tower of Babel was built to get to the city of Enoch, because the city of Enoch was visible from the ground, partially behind the veil. Now, I read this quote and I was like, there's no way. And so I went and found as many other quotes as I could that corroborate this, because remember, I'm a lawyer, I'm critical, I want to be able to analyze this. So Joseph Smith said, I will tell you the story of the designs of the building of the Tower of Babel. It was designed to go to the city of Enoch, for the veil was not so great that it hid it from his sight. He also says that it was actually lifted up into heaven to get above the impure air that was down below. I don't know if that was because of forest fires or viruses or what, okay? But down was bad, up was good. Orson F. Whitney corroborates this, and he says, Joseph Smith taught it was not Babel's intention to reach heaven, but to reach Zion, which was then suspended in midair between heaven and earth, or at such a height as to render the project feasible. This certainly is more reasonable. They were trying to get to something they could see. This is from Joseph Young, Brigham Young's brother. He wrote a little pamphlet called Enoch and His City that talks about the 70 in Enoch and this idea of the city of Enoch rising to the heavens, quote, with a large piece of earth immediately connected with the foundations and the city, in an aerial position within the limits of our solar system. There it remained partially behind the veil as a fixed reminder of Earth's destiny to rise from its fallen state. So that last part's me. This idea that God was saying, hey, you're supposed to come up. Why is that necessary? Why was that something he was trying to show people? Because God's miracles, his best miracles, are always temporal and spiritual. They're always symbolic and literal. Because you are a temporal and spiritual person. You have a spirit and a body. You're experiencing spiritual things and temporal things all the time. So of course he's going to try and communicate to both parts of you. He's going to try and say, spirit, this is what this is, and body, this is what this is. And then he brings into harmony that understanding so that you are most edified. His best symbols are always literal too. The dividing of the Red Sea was not, hey, look, that spiritual sea is divided. No, it was, right? Make a pathway through the ocean. So this idea of Zion being lifted to the heavens, now I don't know if this is it, and there are scientists who probably would disagree with me, but as I studied this, there's actually, Joseph Smith taught in that pamphlet that Joseph Young wrote, Brigham Young's brother, he taught that the city of Enoch was lifted from the Gulf of Mexico and it would return to that state when it came back with Christ in the last day. There's a crater called the Chicxulub crater. I wanted to be a paleontologist as a kid. I thought dinosaurs were awesome. I learned this was the crater that the asteroid hit that made all the dinosaurs go bye-bye, right? What's fascinating is that scientists who've studied this have questioned whether this was actually the impact crater, because there's no iridium, there's no traces of meteor impact, there's no mining, there's no evidence of human interaction or natural erosion. It's just a big hole in the ground. So it would be consistent with Joseph Smith's statement that the city of Enoch was lifted out of the Gulf of Mexico. It was about 110 miles wide, and it's possibly a place. It's also consistent with Moses 6 and 7, where we have this showdown between Enoch and the giants. And Enoch raises, he has the power to command the elements, and he literally raises barren earth from beneath the ocean, and the giants run away and go escape on barren earth. Well, this is right next to the ocean, so it would be consistent with that. So this is just a point of evidence to suggest, hey, maybe this is where it was. What's fascinating, though, is that Joseph Fielding Smith, he gives us something that really helps us understand. This is not a faraway fairy tale. This is not just something that we should be like, oh, that was cool once upon a time. This is actually the grand destiny of the earth. This is what we're supposed to be working for right now in these last days. He talked about how the Lord who created the earth certainly controls it. Why try to deny him his power? Moreover, we are taught that portions of this earth have been taken from it, such as the city of Enoch, which included the land surfaces as well as the people. So Joseph Fielding Smith, Jacob 4 verse 9 talks about how when you have the priesthood and you have faith in Christ, you can command the wind and the oceans and even the trees. Why would you command a tree? I have some thoughts on that, but we'll save that for later, okay? Abraham's heaven, after Enoch was lifted up into the heavens, Abraham's heaven was above. The Jews have a tradition that Abraham wanted to be carried on the wings of a dove back home. He had a longing to follow the ancient patriarchs. He wanted to pursue the priesthood. He wanted to be connected with his ancestors. And Abraham is a descendant of Noah, who was a great-grandson of Enoch. And so there's this grand tradition of people recognizing that if they want to get back home, they have to go up. And it has influenced all major religions, like we're talking about. Christianity and Judaism all talk about how Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. Islam refers to Enoch as a prophet raised to a high position. Not symbolic only, it's also literal. And this is all because we're dealing with a fall that led to the need to rise. And the fall wasn't just symbolic either. The fall was literal. It was so painful, it's called spiritual death. And we've talked about this a lot ever since you guys, I'm sure, were kids. And there's a lot of really, really smart people here. I'm sure every single person here has heard a Sunday school lesson about the fall. And many, many of you could probably get up and give great lessons on this because you're here on a Sunday evening. You have the Spirit with you, right? But this fall is described by Joseph Smith as a literal fall. And what's fascinating is that NASA actually has a couple of scientists who are suggesting that when the earth fell, Adam and Eve fell, it literally was ejected from somewhere, and it's still traveling. It's almost as if the sun, our entire solar system, is moving like a comet through space, and our Earth is caught in its wake in a celestial orbit, so to speak. It's almost as if we were ejected from home, and God said, hey, good luck, go get experience and come back. That's kind of what happened to us, but it was painful. And what's really interesting is when Adam and Eve fell, the Hebrews actually have a tradition where they talk about how when God showed up after Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God said, Ayaka, which in Hebrew doesn't mean where are you? It means where is your light? Adam, where did your light go? The Hebrews also have a tradition that when Adam and Eve before they ate the fruit, they had bodies that were so powerful and so majestic that the angels trembled in their presence. Now this is consistent with our doctrine, right? We know that progression happened when we got bodies. It was a step forward. Joseph Fielding Smith talks about how, sure, we fell, but it was like we fell upstairs. Okay, like you're walking upstairs and trip forward and fall up. And so the Hebrews talk about this idea that before Adam and Eve ate the fruit, their bodies had glory. They had a brightness within them. There's a pseudo-epigraphal book that corroborates this called The Book of Adam and Eve. It talks about how Adam and Eve actually had light. And when they ate the fruit, they complained to God afterwards and they said, we used to be able to see brightness within each other. We used to radiate light, and we used to be able to look up into the heavens and see your angels and hear them singing and feel close to your burnings. Now that we've eaten the fruit, we've lost our ability to hear and see. And they're really, really bothered by it. It's so sad to them that they don't eat for 40 days. And finally, Christ, according to this tradition, shows up and is like, hey guys, you have to eat. You can't just, wallow in your misery down here on earth. I know you got kicked out of the garden, but Here's some food. Let's go. Let's I got your back. I'll help you come back. But so this idea of falling was not only the idea of our planet being ejected, us being kicked out of heaven, but it was also this idea that we lost light. And the Hebrews also refer to this return to light, or this regaining of who we really are. They refer to it as aliyah, which is like a pilgrimage. Now, it became this idea of returning to Jerusalem for a period of time, but that was kind of more of a gathering back to Jerusalem. The original Hebrew idea is to ascend or to go up. When the Jews go on a pilgrimage, when they're trying to regain their light, they're trying to regain the presence of God. So in other words, they're trying to follow the commandments so that they can obtain light and lift. They can rise and radiate. They can have elevation and illumination. Hopefully this is making sense. So, this is a picture of our galaxy. This is the pleasing bar of God at the center of the galaxy. Isn't it amazing that science is starting to corroborate all the stuff that has been talked about in the Book of Mormon? And so when we see in Jacob or in Alma, they talk about being raised before the pleasing bar of God, there really is a bar at the center of the galaxy. NASA calls it a bar galaxy. And this is where we are, a comet ejected from the center of the galaxy, trying to figure out how to get back home. The reason I want to talk about this, and I think it's important to set the stage with, is because this physical, temporal, spiritual combination is something that is designed all around us to invite us to seek Christ and return to be with Him. The entire existence around us is trying to call to us. It's almost as if Christ is singing to us, saying, come back. Find me. And that's because Christ is our why. That's why I go to church. That's why I try and share with my brothers and my sisters. That's why I read the scriptures. I want to have a relationship with Christ, and I want to be able to have a relationship with my heavenly parents one day, return to God. Christ is our why. He's the reason we can return to heaven. And Zion is our how. Zion is our how, and it's awesome. It's meant to be spectacular. It's meant to be glorious. And one of the reasons life is so hard sometimes is because then it's even more miraculous when it works out, right? Like me being stuck in traffic for an hour, and all of a sudden I was able to be here on time. It's almost like God is like, I'll make your Christmas morning more awesome. Santa Claus isn't coming. Oh, he came. Right? Joseph Smith taught building Zion will, quote, bring about the destruction of the powers of darkness, the renovation of the earth, the glory of God, and the salvation of the human family, end quote. Christ uses Zion to, quote, unite the heavenly priesthood with the earthly, end quote, and bring about his great purposes and establish eternal peace. So right now, there's a great book if you want to read this. It's not a religious book. It's written by a bunch of economists and historians. It's called The Fourth Turning. And right now, I bet how many of you, by a show of hands, feel like we're kind of entering, have you read that? Yeah?
No, but I had a bookstore.
Oh, you had a bookstore, so you know. How many of you feel like we're kind of entering a winter right now? Like the world's getting pretty crazy? Yeah? I feel that. You just look around and you're like, what is going on? Putin is another Hitler, right? Did we ever think we'd have that day? Well, the Fourth Turning goes through how we as people go through seasons about every 100 to 120 years. And the seasons, like the Pride cycle in the Book of Mormon, go from spring to summer to fall to winter. Back in 1980, they wrote this book and they said, hey, by the way, by 2020, there's going to be a significant event. And they do it based off of just historical data because they find the pattern over and over again so consistently that they can speak with a surety that it's going to happen. They say, by 2020, we're going to enter a winter. And during that winter, there's going to be this reformation of the beliefs and the ideas and the morality of the people of the earth. And it's going to be influenced by the youth as much as it's going to be influenced by the elderly, those who have experience. And then we'll enter into a new spring. The last time we went through a spring was in the 60s and 70s. That was a crazy spring, right? People were growing their hair out, doing drugs, love, sex, rock and roll, all that kind of stuff. But you have, and I hope you can feel this when I share this with you, you have the ability to influence that spring that's coming. We can go through the cycle again and have another spring and another winter, or I believe we can do what we were sent to earth to do, and we can prepare for an eternal spring. God's great purpose is an eternal spring. The millennium is an eternal spring. That's the thing that gets me excited in the morning. When things are crazy, I'm like, hey, there's purpose in this. And this purpose can overcome this fear. So you already know, you've probably already heard the phrase, Zion is the pure in heart. I just want to hit some other things here. Zion is not a Hebrew word. It's Adamic. It predates Hebrew spellings of Sion or Slion, and it also predates ancient Sanskrit. If any of you know Sanskrit, some of you might know Sanskrit because of Doctor Strange, right? They were like, hey, let's come up with something really cool and really old, Sanskrit, right? So it predates that. So this is a word that's so significant, it's lasted all the language disruptions and changes of time. In fact, let me kind of just bounce back. When that Tower of Babel was built, just to kind of give you another fun data point, we know that the brother Jared and Jared, so I'll call, Joseph Smith taught us that the brother of Jared is Mahanrai Moriankama, right? So I'm going to refer to him as Mahanrai and Jared. Jared comes to Mahanrai and says, hey, we're about to get cursed. Can you please pray to God and ask that our friends and us won't lose our language? And so they go through that process a couple times and they preserve the language. If you look at the last time Jared goes, before they start off on their journey to find a promised land, Jared comes to Mahanrai and says, hey, Mahanrai, can you see and ask if God will carry us to a place or to a land that is choice above all others? They saw the Tower of Babel. They clearly saw the city of Enoch. And the tradition of translation, of being caught up or carried up or lifted up to a higher place, is so permanent in their cultural history. What's the last thing that Ether, thousands of years later, talks about? He talks about being caught up. He says, I don't care what happens to me. I might be translated or I might die. As long as I'm saving the kingdom of heaven, I don't care. So this idea of translation, I mean, just imagine it. Just close your eyes for a second and think about, all of a sudden you see the St. George Temple lifted up into the heavens, and there's all this rubble around, and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have missed church on Sunday. Right? That's it. But we also know, according to Moses, we know that Enoch sent angels down and caught other people up over and over again, right? So this idea of being able to be caught up, it's not a condemnation thing, it's an invitation thing. It's a constant invitation. It's a constant come back, rise up, be with me, harmonize with me. So it predates these words, and some scholars suggest that Zion means a castle or dry land, that it's a Jeshurite fortress King David conquered near Jerusalem. But that, again, that's not the point. The point is the word and the meaning of Zion are much more than these concepts. Zion is a purpose. It's a calling. It's our collective how. It's how we build heaven on earth right now. And we don't have to wait. I don't want to wait any longer. I have friends who are like, oh, the earth's not crazy enough yet. Christ can't come back. I'm like, it's not about the earth getting crazy. Crazy's been happening for a long time. It's about us being righteous enough. It's about us loving each other enough and forgiving each other enough and being patient with each other enough and not taking advantage of each other enough, right? Like, no offense, but I grew up in Provo, but I kind of feel like there's a Mormon cultural, oh, my neighbor wants to do something cool, I'm gonna steal that idea and do it instead. Anybody have a friend that's happened to them? Right? And that happens because we think our worth is wrapped up in our works or our possessions or our things or our experiences. But Christ is trying to say, hey, it's not about those things, it's about me. You're defined by me, not by anything else that's happened to you or that you possess. And so Zion becomes our how we rally around Christ and each other. So I'm just going to hit quickly some of the religions this has influenced. Egypt's heaven was above. Egypt's pharaohs, known as the sons of Ra, they would ride celestial arcs and bring the sun up. China, Japan, it's actually 550, that's a typo. 550 dynasties had emperors called the sons of heaven with a divine mandate from heaven above. They actually literally taught that they were the children of heaven and they had the authority to help people get back up to heaven. European monarchies refer to themselves as Your Highness. Are you starting to see the theme? This is like so indelibly imprinted on the consciousness of all of humanity. It's kind of laughable that we don't think about it more. We just take it for granted. So Zion's symbols of this rising, of this ascent up to heaven have been preserved across time as well. Now, back then, they didn't have a common language after the Tower of Babel, so you had to come up with symbols that could last the test of time and also transcend language barriers, and they're very, very simple. First of all, heaven was represented by a circle. And that's because back in Abraham and Enoch's day, heaven would have been a circle. It would have been this dome above the earth. And the circle is represented universally by the number 3. The Godhead, and it's kind of funny, but think about water, what we know chemically about water. How many atoms are in a molecule of water? 3, right? Like the Godhead. It's one and it's individual, has transcendent and changes states, all that kind of stuff. So heaven is the symbol of a circle, and it's represented by the number 3. Earth is represented by the number 4. And that's because if you read the scriptures, we have the 4 winds, the 4 corners, the 4 regions of the earth, like a map. So when you take 3 plus 4, you get 7. Lucky number 7 in Vegas, right? No, better than that. Lots better than that, much more lasting. So this symbol right here of heaven and earth together is something you can see all over, it's all over the temple. In the Las Vegas temple, it's on the front. You have a circle and a square. I have a temple president member who actually also suggested to me, he said the circle actually represents women and the square represents men, and there's this duality and this harmony. And so there's all these ideas of these dichotomies that are brought into one in Christ. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you get the number 7 for Zion. And the number 7 is also everywhere. 7 creative periods, 7 other planets beside the earth, 7 continents, 7 days in the week, 7 seas, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 words to Joseph Smith. This is my beloved son, hear him. It's not coincidental. This is the message from heaven above to earth beneath. Come back. Build heaven on earth. Love each other so that I can return. And the first time it happened was with Enoch. And so this is the seal of Enoch. Now, Hugh Nibley talks about the seal of Melchizedek. Some of you, anybody heard of that? The seal of Melchizedek? Yeah? So the seal of Melchizedek comes about in a little bit. We'll explain how this works. But I just want to highlight that the rainbow, hopefully you all know this because we read about it in Come Follow Me, but the rainbow is the symbol of Zion. So is it any wonder that Satan is like, ha ha ha, I'm going to steal that symbol. I'm the great counterfeiter, right? But the rainbow was first given to Enoch when Enoch went up into heaven and he saw that Noah was going to be destroyed. And he was like, help my grandson. And God was like, okay, I'll give you a rainbow. So the symbol of the rainbow, a bridge to heaven, was first given to Enoch about Noah. And what symbol, or what shape does a rainbow look like when you look at it from above, by the way? Anybody know? It's a circle. You mean like, oh, I'm going too fast. How do I go back? Oh, that's how I go back. Kind of like that circle, right? Like, so this idea of the circle, a portal, a bridge up, lifting up, is preserved in the rainbow. And the rainbow has 7 colors. Now, I don't bring this up to cause any angst to anybody. I'm just highlighting the truth. The Gay Pride rainbow has 6 colors. The true rainbow has 7 colors. Let that sink in for just a minute, okay? The great counterfeiter can't exactly replicate.
Can't count.
Nope. And the color indigo is actually missing from the Gay Pride rainbow. Now, I have a gay uncle, I have gay cousins, I have friends that are gay. I'm not casting any judgment on them. I'm just highlighting the fact that this is a satanic symbol and this is a godly symbol, okay? And so if you want to rally around a flag, we should be rallying around the true flag of Zion in love and kindness and gentleness with people. And those that are attracted to this, they're our friends. They're attracted to this because they know this is true. They just have been deceived or manipulated or abused or whatever the issue is. So when we look at a true rainbow, I hope you start to see that we need to claim it back. It's our symbol. It's God's symbol. It was first given to Enoch. And I know we've been culturally influenced to be afraid of talking about this, but I don't want to be afraid anymore. I just want to trust that God has a path for this. This is his symbol. This is who he is. He harmonizes all the colors. Everyone's individual and united. That's what Zion is. And it's awesome. You can be unique and part of a family, right? And he does this because he's the great reconciler. Christ reconciles dichotomies. And for those of you who can't read all these, I'm just going to hit some of them really quick. Life is full of dichotomies. We have night and day, men and women, right? They're kind of polar opposites. If you don't know what the word dichotomy means, it means things that are kind of, they don't look like they should fit together, but somehow they fit together, right? We got truth and love, heaven and earth, spirit and body, circles and squares, life and death, perfection and sin, eternity, mortality, spirit, body, water, land, people, objects, peace and war. Christ designed it this way. Our heavenly parents designed it this way. The tension, the opposition gives us room to grow and experience. And it also is this beautiful opportunity for him to demonstrate to us that he can bring all opposition, all conflict into one great whole through his at-one-ment, or his atonement. He harmonizes the tension. He brings peace to the conflict. Because there is good on both sides. Now, I worked for President Bush and President Obama as a law clerk. Okay? Don't judge me. Okay? There's good on both sides. Is there more bad on one side? I'll probably give you that, okay? But there's good on both sides. And I'll let you pick which side you think I'm talking about, okay? But the idea is he reconciles. He brings all things into one. That's what this is all about. Zion is a reconciliation. It's a harmony of mind and heart, works and faith, reason and compassion, individualism and unity, justice and mercy. And this could only happen in America because we're built, the Hafens have a great book on this called Faith is Not Blind. They mention it just briefly. We're built as America on a foundation of dichotomies. That's why we have Republicans and Democrats. We have the Greek tradition of the mind and justice and order, and you got to do things by your grit. This Greek idea of democracy and intelligence. And then you have the Hebrew tradition of family and compassion, and we're all part of a great whole. You take those two things together, and all of a sudden you have this room, this collision of ideas where democracy can be born, where we can have debate, where we can have different ideas, and we can flourish together in harmony. And it's really, really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. Who here reads Facebook and is like, oh, I hate that? Have you ever felt that feeling? Well, they're programmed. They program their software to manipulate you. Just FYI, Google actually has a patent on manipulating your physiological state. I'll show you the patent after this if you want. Okay, so they're trying to cause contention, but the reality is Christ has the power and the ability with us together to bring it all into harmony. He can reconcile it. He can bring it into peace. So Zion is this idea of reconciliation. It's all these things together, and it's also heavens on earth in Christ. How many of you here, and don't be ashamed, I won't judge you, okay? But how many of you here think that Zion is just one place? Ever had that thought? Jackson County, Missouri? Or Independence, Missouri? Yeah? Yeah? Here in St. George? Absolutely, it's totally here. It's totally here. You guys have the first temple. Hello. Well, whenever we are able to combine heaven, there's a bunch of scriptural references for heaven being a circle, by the way, if you're like bothered by that. Okay? Heaven, earth gives us Zion. Didn't mean to put so many clickies in here, sorry. But then the church is calling to us to help us do this all over the world. President Hinckley has a great quote where he says, Zion is in Romania for the Romanians. He doesn't actually say Romania. That's just where I start my mission. But he said that idea, right? So this idea of uniting heaven and earth it's even in the church's new logo. Do you see it? The square and the circle. And where is Zion? It's right between Christ's crucified hands. He carries it. He's right there. He's inviting us to it. Isn't that amazing? I don't even know how I figured that out, but it's just kind of cool. So these symbols are everywhere. They're in temples, churches, religious art, scriptures. And it's transcended time, okay? This is a solar temple in Niosiri, Egypt. Can you see the circle in the square? Okay. This is the temple of heaven in China. It's 3 circles, 1, 2, 3, and 3 circles in a square. What does that look like? Kind of like, Planet Salvation, 3 kingdoms, and then 3 kingdoms in the top kingdom. This temple of heaven was the religion of China before communism took over and destroyed it. And what would happen is a son of heaven, an emperor, of one of the 550-ish that were in China and Japan, the same religion existed there. They would walk to the entrance, they would disrobe, they'd be washed, anointed, they'd perform a sacrifice, they'd put on new clothing, they'd walk into the inner chamber, and they'd go up, and the whole idea was for them to enter the presence of heaven and petition for the mercy of heaven on behalf of their people. What does that sound like? Isn't that amazing? And communism wrecked it. Just totally gutted it and destroyed it, okay? I served my mission in Romania and Moldova. I know how stupid communism is. I have seen it firsthand. It just rips the soul out of people, and that's the battle we're fighting right now, right? So, this was there. This was in Moldova where I served my mission. You can see the squares and the circle, and the square and the circle. Stefan Cel Mare, which was like their George Washington, he was fighting against the Turks and the Arabs, and whenever they would have a battle, he was Christian. He would win. He had like 30 battles, and every time he'd win a battle, he'd build a church at the place of victory. And they would always, an Orthodox priest told me, they would always build it with a square base and a circle top. Why? Because it's Zion. Because people know it's not just the impression of Enoch rising to the heavens, it's part of who we are as spirit sons and daughters of our heavenly parents. Orson Pratt actually taught, this is how God rescues all of his children on every fallen earth. It's through Zion. Isn't that cool? It's the grand method of redemption. The Masons talk about it, the circle and the square. Can you see the square and the circle? The compass does a circle and the square does the square. And so it pops up in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which was built by the Masons, right? Circles and a square. Sorry, this photo may not show you the square that well, but it's everywhere. Who here has seen this in Washington, D.C.? I know you have. Yeah? What's this called? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's in the center of the Capitol building, and it's called the Apotheosis of George Washington, which is Greek for, remember we went back to Greek heritage? Greek for, literally, the raising of George Washington to the status of a god. It's his being lifted to Zion. His ascending to heaven and becoming like his heavenly parents. Anybody who tells you that America wasn't built on echoes of Zion either doesn't know or they're lying to you, okay? It's so obvious. And by the way, the Washington Capitol is actually a massive compass and square built by the Masons. It's really cool. If you ever want to look at a map, you can see it. It's like, anyway. So, it's buried everywhere. Here's the Las Vegas temple, circles and squares. Here's the Palmyra temple, circles and squares. Bountiful temple, Kentucky temple. It's everywhere, okay? St. George temple, you have circles and squares, but you also have the arch, which is really cool.
Squares to the top of the circles.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. There's a square and the circle at the top. Yeah, that's it. That's it. That symbol is universal. So this idea of Zion calling us above, it's everywhere, and it's what we're meant to do. So Christ has and continues to carry the righteous up to Zion, his, quote, secret place of the Most High, end quote. That's in D&C 45. And he has raised up, in D&C 38, it says, he has raised up, quote, even as many as have believed in my name, end quote, to his bosom in Zion. So it's not a one-time affair. In fact, the Hebrews don't believe in, generally, they don't believe in individual translation. They believe in communal translation. It's communities that get translated. So the idea of Elijah was a really, really big deal because it was just him. But generally, translation happens because communities of people unite their hearts and follow Christ and do good stuff. Now, you may have heebie-jeebies. You might be like, well, you mean like Warren Jeff community? And I'm like, no, we're not talking about that, right? Or some other David, whatever his name is, Koresh, right? That's, again, Satan trying to mimic this. None of this stuff is ever meant to contradict what we're taught in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The communities we have here are wards and stakes where we love each other and we forgive each other. And if we follow the gospel, we will be able to build Zion beneath and have Zion join heaven above and Zion above. And this is the seal of Melchizedek, which is exactly what Melchizedek did. He lived at a very wicked time. He changed his name to point people to Christ. Malki Zadok means my king righteousness. Melchizedek had his name changed to point people to Christ. He didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about the Savior. And when he lifted his earth up to heaven, he joined heaven above. And Hugh Nibley talks about how that's the seal of Melchizedek. And it's all over the San Diego temple. I found a really cool thing one day. It was almost kind of like all these things started falling into place. This is the Riak structure, or the Eye of Africa. You can see it from space. There's no meteor impact. There's no mining. It's treated as holy by the locals. And it's just 100-kilometer wide, big hole in the ground. I don't know if this is where Melchizedek's city rose up from heaven, or to heaven, but it would fit. The only reason I highlight this is because I want to just reemphasize, if you could go back and see what the Red Sea being divided looked like with faith, with eyes of faith, wouldn't it be chilling? Wouldn't it be edifying? That's my whole point, is there are evidences all over the earth of what Christ is trying to do. And that same seal is all over the Salt Lake City temple as well. Zion has, this communal translation idea has been so consistent. There's actually a lot of other stories about it. You have Enoch and Zion, you have Melchizedek and Salem, the Jaredites, like we talked about, although they were saved for another purpose. But there are stories of people being translated, and I think the reason Ether hoped he would be translated is because he knew of other people that had been translated, other communities. You also have Moses, which we know because of the Book of Mormon. Moses, and I believe his family, portions of his family were lifted up into heaven, not just by himself. Alma 13. There's also the Rechabites referred to in Jeremiah 35. The Rechabites are this really cool story of this group of people that were commanded to water the earth and not build cities and not plant gardens. They just had sheep. Jeremiah invites them into the temple. Jeremiah says, hey, drink some wine here in the Holy of Holies. And they're like, we made a covenant. We would not do that. We don't drink. And he's like, good, you passed the test. Now you will never want for a man in the presence of the Lord. And then the Hebrews have a tradition, the Jews have a tradition that the Rechabites, the entire community was actually lifted up into heaven. And they stand up there as the shining ones, and they watch us. And they're waiting for the day when we could be reunited. The three Nephites are another example of people that have been translated or received that change, John the Revelator. And there are lots of future risings, including one that's prophesied in D&C 84. Now, D&C 84 talks about how awesome this last day will be when there will be so many groups of righteous saints on the earth that when Christ descends with the city of Enoch and all the angels in heaven above, there will be communities that will lift up by the foundation stones and meet in heaven above. And we'll fall. In Moses, it talks about how Enoch prophesies that we will fall on each other's necks and weep because we're finally back together again. That's the triumphant end of the earth. It's going to be awesome. And this idea of reconciliation includes not only heart and mind, but it also is the reconciliation of the kingdom and the church. Joseph Smith taught, it was in the Come Follow Me 2 years ago, Joseph Smith taught there's a material difference between the church and the kingdom. The church obviously is part of the kingdom, but the church is focused on the salvation of men. The kingdom's focused on the agency of men. And that's why I just want to bring this up because there are a lot of people who are members of the kingdom who don't look like us. They don't wear white shirts and ties, but they're members of Christ's kingdom. They have faith to make miracles happen. And we need to just be willing to throw our arms around anybody who doesn't look like us, who's a member of the kingdom. Because the world's going to keep getting crazier. And we need to have as many friends as we can, right? So you see this manifest with the prophecies from Nephi. Nephi talks about how the church in the last days will be small. But Daniel talks about how the kingdom in Daniel 2 that's cut out of the mountain without hands will be large and fill the whole earth. And President Oaks talked about how that kingdom has filled the whole earth. We got rid of kingdoms and we now have constitutions. There's only 3 countries on the planet that don't have constitutions. And so Christ is the King of Kings over the kingdom and the Lord of Lords over the church. And that's also why we have a Zion in Jerusalem and a Zion in the New Jerusalem, and he'll reign from both. It's back to this idea of dichotomies. And when that happens, we'll have this unification of multiple pieces of the earth, and we will enjoy a kingdom that has 12 gates, one for each tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel, that looks like a flower budding up to heaven, and also looks like a crown of thorns that Christ the Redeemer wore to bring about Zion. Isn't that beautiful? This is the seal of Christ, and it's in temples everywhere as well, including the Las Vegas temple. So here's my last point. We get to choose how quickly this happens. We are the accelerant, our hearts, because our hearts are the creative seats of our souls. Our hearts affect the very matter around us. Do you want to hear a couple of really cool stories related to this? Okay. Do an experiment when you get home, and you have to mean it, okay, or else it's not going to work, because you have to have your heart in it. Remember when you were a kid and you would hit somebody, and your mom, or like your sister or brother, and your mom would say sorry, and you'd be like, sorry, and they'd be like, no, say it like you really mean it. And you'd be like, okay, I'm sorry, right? Like you really put your heart into it. If you put your heart into this, I know it will work. I've done it 3 times with my own kids. Go get 3 jars of rice. Put the jars of rice next to each other, and put a little bit of water in each one. Make sure that it's a controlled experiment. Put a little bit of water in each one. Put lids on them, and then on the left one, write, I love you. On the middle one, write, I hate you. And on the last one, write, nothing. And morning and night for at least a week, maybe 10 days, go to those jars of rice and say it and mean it. Go to the left one and say, I love you. I love you, rice. Okay? Say it like you mean it. Go to the middle one and say, I hate you, and go to the far one and ignore it. If you do this experiment, the left one, after time, will start to turn brown and ferment and smell sweet. The middle one will turn black. And the far right one that you're ignoring will grow even blacker. Because being ignored is worse than being hated. Right? The reason this happens is because we have the ability to speak and affect the matter around us. Every miracle that we know about that Moses performed, except for a couple, occurred when he spoke. And Christ is referred to as the Word, right? He spoke to create light. Moses spoke to divide the Red Sea. Now, there's debate about that because of the Old Testament, and you watch Disney and it's like, he sticks the staff in the water. But if you read Nephi says, no, he spoke to divide the Red Sea. There's power in speech. And what does Christ say about the people that are not following him when he shows up to Joseph Smith? He condemns them because he says, they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. When we align our lips and our hearts and we speak meaningfully, purposefully, faithfully, we have the ability to move mountains, literally. When we have faith in Christ, we have the ability to move mountains, not just symbolically. So we have the ability to accelerate the coming of Zion. We have the ability to prepare the way for the Lord. We have the ability to make his path straight and to heal our hearts and the other hearts around us as we draw other people to Christ. Because as we join with him, he's the founder and creator of Zion. As we join with him, so are we. That's his invitation. He's not saying, watch how awesome I am. He's saying, come do this with me. Let's create it together. One of the ways we can do this is we can speak love, then truth. Now, I don't know if anybody here is a lifeguard. Anybody ever been a lifeguard before? Swimmers? Yeah, lifeguard? It's a great gig, isn't it? It's so fun. Have you ever tried to save somebody who's drowning who doesn't want to be saved? It's really hard. Yeah, make him go down, right? Yeah. I was a lifeguard for a number of years down at Seven Peaks in Provo. Big muscular guy once. He did not want to be saved. He kept elbowing me every time I pull him out of the water. I'm like, okay, go back down in the water, right? The only way we can save someone is with love and truth. So what happens is you have to go to someone who's drowning, and instead of saying, stop drowning, does that work? No. You have to go to someone and say, it looks like you're having a really hard time. And just have compassion and understanding. Let me show you this. When we have that compassion and understanding, when we're pure in heart, we're able to unite our hearts and our minds, and we're able to flourish in the mountaintops. Now, you guys already live in the mountaintops. You've already been given this incredible heritage of faith, of tradition, of goodness. You're probably some of the most perfectly poised people to withstand the winter that's coming. Zion is not only a place, it's a creative coexistence where together we love each other and God. We help each other. We forgive each other. And we do it so perfectly, it becomes, Joseph Smith said, philosophically impossible for us to stay on earth below. This is why there's no insurance in Zion, by the way. If you're an insurance broker, I'm sorry, but you don't need it there. We don't need any payouts if somebody steals our stuff, because nobody steals our stuff, right? Or somebody gets in an accident, you take care of them instead of just waiting for the insurance to do it. And this life is all about learning how to unite our hearts in love and compassion with each other. All right. Are we okay? Should we stop here? I don't. No?
For what?
No, I don't want to go longer. Okay, well, I'll only go like 15 more minutes. Does that sound good? Okay. There's a really good example of how Satan, knowing this about our hearts, he tries to block our ability to create. He tries to convince us to tell ourselves things about ourselves and about the people around us, because he knows he can't create. He doesn't have a temple. He doesn't have a body. But he knows if he goes to you when you have a bad experience and he says, that means God doesn't love you. You don't have any hair. Yeah, that's because you're ugly and God doesn't love you. I'm with you, brother. We're in the same boat. I think it looks great, but okay. Or, oh, that girl said no, or oh, that guy said yes, or whatever, right? Or your car isn't fast. It's not the newest car. He's really good at getting us to start to tell ourselves things about ourselves that are destructive. And that's why Enoch, when he was lifted up into heaven, he saw that Satan had chains of darkness binding eyes, hearts, and deafening ears, hardening hearts and deafening ears. We're all really, really susceptible to that. When my kid, I have a gorgeous little 5-year-old who's my youngest. She's my fifth little kid. She's adorable. Her name's Grace. When she comes to me and whines, I feel like my world's falling apart, right? And I'm sure some of you have kids like that where you're like, ugh, you just feel it. Those experiences, though, don't define us. Christ defines us. But Satan's really good at convincing us that they do define us. And so he comes to us and he says, hey, it's cool to be hard-hearted, deaf, and blind. Have you seen anybody like this on an airplane? They put on the sunglasses, they wear the headphones, they don't want any interaction with the world around them. It's not very cool, it's kind of stupid. But that's the message of Babylon, right? It's so much so that Enoch saw in our day, Satan had great dominion among men. He raged in their hearts, and from thenceforth came wars and bloodshed. A man's hand was against his own brother in administering death because of secret works seeking for power. The whole debate about abortion, the whole debate about what we're doing with other people and don't touch my body and all this kind of stuff, all of this comes back to when people are at war in their own hearts, they create war outside themselves. When people have fear and pain that they don't know how to reconcile and take and give to Christ, they create war. They feel so upside down, they feel like the only way to make themselves feel normal is to make the world upside down. That's what Putin is doing. I spent a couple of years in Eastern Europe on my mission. Putin's broken. The reason he's acting that way is because he doesn't know how to heal. And God will judge Putin for the evils that he's accomplishing. But I know one thing. If you want to help somebody who's like a Putin in your family, the only way they can change is by Christ's love, then truth. And it's not just enabling love. It's not like, oh, we love you, it's okay, you can go commit genocide. It's not that kind of love. It's, I love you and you need to stop. So this is what Enoch did. He would go around, He would go around to people who were acting like this, who were raging, the giants and the people who were killing their own children and shedding each other's blood. And he would say, hey, you need to shape up. And he had this ability where he could look at someone, because Enoch had transcended the blindness of the veil, the deafness of the veil that we all experience. And he could look at someone and he could say, I see who you are right now, and I see who you were before you came to earth, and I see what your glorious potential is in the future. And you need to stop cheating on your wife. And people got really mad at Enoch, right? But that's what we have to do. We have to have compassion and truth. It's the only way that we can open up our eyes and open up our ears and open up our hearts. And the Lord highlights this. He says in Moses 6:27, I am angry with this people, and my fierce anger is kindled against them, for their hearts have waxed hard, their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes cannot see afar off. Back to Adam and Eve, right? When they fell, they couldn't see, they couldn't hear. But almost all of us, at least when we're born and up and maybe until we're teenagers, we can all feel. And so when we have that ability to feel, we need to have moments where we feel the Spirit, where people invite us to Christ. Have you guys seen this ad before? Stay thirsty, my friends. Satan wants us to stay thirsty, right? But Christ is the bread of life. He's the living water. And so we can undergo a personal restoration. We can have reconciled our own past, present, and future. The restoration isn't just about restoring the gospel. If you read the Book of Mormon, it talks about how we have and also Isaiah and Moses and Alma and Jacob, they all talk about how the restoration is the restoring of people. It's helping people regain their ability to feel, to hear, and to see. And Enoch underwent his own restoration. When he was lifted up into heaven, it talks about how his heart was stretched wide as eternity, and he wept. God wants us to feel everything, the sorrow and the joy. So much so that just a quick aside, when the Nephites were traveling through the wilderness and after they had gone back and gotten the daughters of Ishmael, and they all got married, and then Ishmael dies. Do you know what they named the place where Ishmael died? They name it Nahom, which in Hebrew means complete sorrow and complete joy at the same time. That's what Christ is inviting us to feel. So much so that when we talk about the gifts that Christ wants to give us, he's trying to help us be able to feel that and not have those feelings change who we are. Brigham Young taught that the greatest gift God grants his children is the gift of eternal life, the ability to preserve our identity, who we really are in the presence of God. Because when Christ shows up at that last day, he changes everything. Okay, I'll end with this. Sound good? If I can leave you with one practical tool, this is what I would suggest. My wife and I have taught Institute over the years together. I've taught seminary a lot, and we've had a lot. I'm in the Singles War bishopric down in Vegas right now. We have people who come to us. I had a sweet gal who came to us a little while ago, 2 weeks ago, and she was like, she's very sweet, very intelligent. And I would say stuff like, that's amazing you're doing that, or isn't it great you're getting this degree, or whatever. And she just was totally unwilling to accept any compliment, any type of love. Do you know anybody like this? They just can't accept it. It's because they have this thing inside them, this experience, this pain, this fear, this wound that's preventing them from hearing the voice of truth, that's preventing them from hearing the voice of love. And so it's difficult and it takes time. But if you can have a conversation with someone in compassion, where you sit with them in their pain and in their fear, and you help them feel seen and heard, and they become vulnerable, they can open up and they can identify the experiences that they've had that have led them to feel that way. For me, when I was a child, I was, I think, almost 9 or 10. I was very sick. And my mother was the Young Women's president, and she had young women over, and she was doing a Young Women's presidency meeting. And I was so sick, I was so much in pain that I felt like I should call out, but I couldn't, to my mom. And she was just in one room over, and I was home from school, and my body still remembers the pain. And she didn't know, and I felt like she did. And so I interpreted that experience to mean, if I'm in pain, the way a 9-year-old brain works, if I'm in pain, that means God doesn't love me. And it influenced my life for the next 20 years, 25 years. So that whenever I felt pain, I would interpret that as a message that God didn't love me and that I wasn't good enough. And so I compensated by working really, 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 really hard. That's why I went and got jobs with presidents, and I worked for billionaires. And that's why it was my drive. So there was good and bad that came from that. When someone has an experience like that, if you can help them go back to that moment, almost all of us have childhood experiences like this, where they influence our identity, our personality. Go back to that moment, and I had to identify that in that moment I was feeling wounded, I was feeling ignored, I was feeling alone. And then the second step, step 2, was I had to acknowledge the feelings that I generated for myself, because my thoughts led to feelings. I started to create with my internal lips, voice in my head, and my heart. And I started to tell myself, I'm disappointed, I'm unseen, I'm not good enough. And that message created a lie that I started telling myself over and over again. So step 1 is identify the experience. Step 2 is acknowledge the feelings. And then step 3 is with someone who can do this, because some people can and some people can't yet. Some people aren't very good at compassion, right? Well, stop being stupid, right? Or I had a friend once who was like, people who sin aren't bad, they're just dumb, right? Like that kind of idea. It's really easy to think that way, right? But Christ doesn't think that way. He has compassion. He stood under the weight of all the world, all the sin, all the pain, all the heartache, and because he stood under, he understands. He knows how to nurture. He knows how to succor. And so, step 3 is have compassion on yourself, or have someone give you compassion, and hear Christ say to you, that must have been hard. That must have been painful. You're not crazy. That wasn't fair. If you can hear him start to say that, you can start to feel just a little bit of love from the source of all love, all light. Then your soul will wake up to the lie you're telling yourself. And for me, the lie I was telling myself, step 4 named the lie I was telling myself was, I'm only good enough if I can prove it. And so I worked really hard. That's how I lost all my hair. Okay. Once I was able to name the lie, and I've done this with a number of other youth in the singles ward, once they named the lie, one young man, his lie was, my dad doesn't love me. Because he had these terrible experiences with his father. As soon as he said that, he was like, and I don't feel like God loves me. It's like our spirit like identifies the lie and it immediately rejects it. It like throws it up. Because our spirits are beings of light. We know what darkness is. And the only reason we keep darkness inside ourselves is because we tell ourselves to do it. So as soon as he said that lie, it was like, he was like, and I feel like God doesn't love me. He was like, whoa. And he put his hands over his mouth. He was like, that was stupid. Why did I say that? But that's what he's been telling himself. Like a broken record over and over again. And so if you can name the lie, then you can eject it. And then you can remove whatever is eclipsing your view of Christ, whatever is preventing you from actually seeing that in that experience, he was right beside you. He was right there, feeling it with you because he loves you. Because he cares about you. And he's ready to help you overcome it. He's ready to turn it into a strength. He's ready to turn it into a blessing. And if you can do that, you can banish the lie with the truth. And the truth for me, the foundational truth that changed me and helped me retire and not work anymore because I didn't have to anymore, because I lost all my hair, was God defines my worth, period. Now, I don't know what your truth is, but you're going to find, if you can get rid of the lie, if you can identify the lie after compassion, after these steps, your spirit will tell you a truth that kicks the lie out, that chases the darkness from you, like it talks about in the Doctrine and Covenants. You can remove those spirits that are telling you to lie to yourself and replace them with the Spirit of God, which tells you truth about who you really are. The reason I focus on this is because every experience is a gift. Every single experience we have is an invitation to come closer to Jesus Christ. And as soon as we can learn to master dealing with pain and heartache and sorrow and fear in our own personal lives, we can build Zion right here. And then we can extend that love and that compassion and that truth to our spouse, which is really hard sometimes, especially if you've been married for like 40 years, right? 44 years? Yeah. Or 25 or whatever it is. 58 years, yeah. You can extend that love to your spouse, and then you can start to build Zion in your family, and then you can start to build Zion in your community. And then when Christ comes, all the promises in the scriptures end with this pinnacle. You'll hear his voice, and you'll see him. You'll hear that he is singing a song of Zion. He's singing a song of harmony and love and forgiveness and beauty and purity and light and truth. And when he shows up, it's going to be incredible. And you'll be worthy enough to see him. I testify that Christ can help you overcome any darkness. He can reconcile any pain. He can help you overcome any sorrow. And he can turn it into strength. And I testify that even though you may feel like a lamb right now, or just one of the sheep in the flock, he wants all of us to become lions for him. and that we can do that together. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.